Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I want to react to a recent interview by one of the most intriguing Brazilians I've ever known about. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this story, how I became aware of who this guy is and, what he was all about, what he is all about. The name of the video, I asked, what if Jesus was a man of color? And that's when everything hit the fan, says Tony Tornado, one of Brazil's most important soul singers. I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible, but this is going to be another of my variety of videos where, okay, I'm going to give you a brief introduction and then I'm going to expand and put it in further context in the longer form video. So with that said, let's get directly into the video because I have a lot of respect for this guy. So I want to talk a little bit about him today. I have various articles at blackbraziltoday.com that talk about Tony Tornado. So let me just get into this video for today. So this was taken from, I don't even know what year this interview is from, but it's an interview with Tony Tornado. He is, people probably know him more as an actor these days, but his importance goes back to the late 60s, early 70s, when in his career as a singer. You could say it was short-lived in terms of how many albums and singles he put out, but it's incredible. This guy is still performing. I'm going to explain why that's incredible in a minute. But this wasn't, I'd say probably in the last 3 to 4 years, this interview came out, if not more. Like I said, I didn't check the date, but when I heard what he said, I'm like, well, this is a topic I've already talked about. So let me talk a little bit about what Tony Tornado had to say. So these are the topics I want to talk about in today's video. Tony Tornado was born Antonio Viana Gomes. He was born in May 26, 1930. So yeah, that makes him 93 years old. In May, he'll be 94. My introduction to Tony Tornado, I always love to tell this story because it's just how it came to me. My first trip to Brazil was Salvador Bahia. I always say Salvador Bahia is Brazil's center of Black culture. Anybody who's into Black cultural things, the diaspora of Black people in the world, you absolutely have to visit Salvador Bahia one day. They call it Black Rome. It is Brazil's center of Black culture. So in September of 2000, I spent my first 3 weeks in Brazil, and it was in Salvador Bahia. I was doing everything I could. I was meeting people. I was talking to people. I was going to places I needed to see as a tourist. I was hanging out. I was buying books, magazines, and I started buying all types of albums. Okay. I love music from outside of U.S. borders. It's intriguing. Anybody who just loves music, to a certain point, you have to start discovering music outside of the borders, outside of the United States. So I started visiting what they call sebos in Brazil. And sebos are like these used magazine, book, album stores. You can find a lot of good stuff in some of the sebos. I've been to them. Wherever I go to a new city or a new state in Brazil that I hadn't been to, I always try to find a sebo because you just find some gems in some of these places. I would go there. I remember it might have been the first or the second trip, actually, come to think of it. I came back with a stack of albums. And I remember, Brazilian, what they call MPB, Brazilian popular music. I bought, bossa nova. I bought samba. I bought Brazilian instrumental music, all types of stuff. And I remember being in one of those record stores. And whenever you go into a sebo, oftentimes they'll have a little miniature record player set up there with earphones so you can listen to the album and see if you want to buy it. And I remember I had about 50 albums that I bought. And when I got to the counter to pay for the albums, the owner of the record store asked me, "Oh, you like Brazilian music? You're você americano, né? Are you an American?" Like, yeah. And well, do you like musica black? Do you like Black music? Like, yeah, of course I like Black music, right? It was a lot of Black Brazilians. I bought music by all types of people. I didn't really care if they were Black or white, even though I did want to know who the Black artists, most important Black artists in Brazil were. I was just buying albums because I had been introduced to Brazilian music. And when you buy Brazilian music in the United States, you'll find an album here, album there. There's a certain handful of artists from Brazil that'll get international attention. But for the most part, if you want to get authentic Brazilian music, and what I mean just the music that Brazilians listen to every day, you have to go to Brazil, right? So I had just all the classic, artists there. I had Chico Buarque, I had Gilberto Gil, I had Milton Nascimento, I had Tim Maia, Os Mutantes, I had I remember Ney Mato Grosso. There was a lot of music I was interested in. I wanted to I was intrigued as why I didn't see so many black artists in the bossa nova movement of the mid to late 50s, right? And so I'm talking to this guy, the owner of the little record store, and he says, "Well, have you ever heard of Tony Tornado?" And I said, "No, who is that?" He was like, "Oh man, you never heard of Tony Tornado? Tony Tornado was like the Brazilian James Brown." I'm like, "Oh, the Brazilian James Brown? I never heard of this guy." He was like, "You need to check him out." He didn't have any albums by Tony Tornado, but ever since I heard the name, I'm like, I got to find out who this guy is. It took me a couple of more years. In this record store that I buy albums from in the United States, albums and CDs, they would get all types of Brazilian stuff in. So I got this compilation CD, and it had music. It was a CD that featured Brazilian artists who were doing a sort of Brazilian soul music. And I'll never forget that CD had some song. Caetano Veloso, one of Brazil's most popular artists. He's not considered a soul artist, but there was a period in, I think, the mid 70s where he was doing his own version of Brazilian soul music. He had a few songs on that CD. There's another guy named Cassiano. He was like, I don't know, he reminds you of something like, I don't know, the Stylistics, maybe one of the Spinners. His music just kind of reminded me of that. He was another Brazilian soul singer. He had a couple songs on that CD. And then I was introduced to this guy named Gerson Kingi Combo. This is another guy, Brazilian black guy, who you could tell the strong James Brown influence in his music and the way that he sung. Then I think later on that year, I happened to find another CD that had a compilation of Brazilian artists on it. And this CD had a song by Tony Tornado on. I'm like, okay, this is the guy that he was talking about. It took me a couple of years to find some music by Tony Tornado, but the song that was on there was a song called Pode Crer Amizade. It came out in 1972. Looks like somebody sampled that song. I got to hear that. Anyway, so this is, it was on a compilation CD. This is not I have this Black Rio. That song is actually on there as well. But it's one of Tony Tornado's biggest hits. Okay. And it was on that CD that I had. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So this is the Tony Tornado that he was telling me about. Right. So I got some of his music. On the next trip that I made to Brazil, I happened to find two of Tony Tornado's albums. One was from 71 and one from 72. And I'm not going to say it's anything on there that's groundbreaking, but when I heard people like Gerson Kingi Combo or Tim Maia or Tony Tornado, I was like, wow, this is what Brazilians, how they interpreted soul music. And those three guys are kind of like the big three of Brazil soul singers. Tim Maia, who's the most popular. Tim Maia died in 1998. Gerson Kingi Combo, I think he died a little bit before I moved back to the US. I think he might have died in 2020, 2021 maybe. And Tony Tornado was still alive and kicking at 93 years old. All of those guys, what they have in common is that they all lived in New York. Tony Tornado actually met Tim Maia in New York. So this was a fascinating story. So I said, I got to know more about this Tony Tornado guy. He says that while he lived in New York, I don't remember him saying how long he lived in New York, but he says while he was there, he worked as a pimp. That's an intriguing story. I mean, they should turn Tony Tornado's story into a movie. There's enough there. It's like, dude, this dude had a really exciting life. In this interview that he did, he's talking about a song that he released where he's questioning, he's asking people like, look, if Jesus Christ was a man of color, would you still love him the way that you love him now? Right. I did a video maybe a couple months ago where a popular Brazilian actress talked about how her father always said God was black. Jesus was black. I don't care what they say. He was a man of color. Right. That's what he's talking about in the interview. That's why I wanted to talk about this today, because it kind of piggybacks on another article that I had done. Black Brazilians, the idea that Black Brazilians should only sing happy samba songs. Now, samba, again, is Brazil's national music. It's kind of kin to American blues or jazz. It's just their historical music that was created by the Black population. But in the 70s, Black Brazilians got introduced to, American soul music. And as I said, those three singers that I just mentioned, they were really responsible for bringing soul music to Brazil, singing in Portuguese. Um, Brazilians were, with the understanding that Brazil was not a racial democracy, a lot of Black Brazilians were gravitating to soul music because there was a lot of protest music and soul music, whereas the samba is like, oh, we're all happy. And the Brazilian elites, particularly this historian anthropologist named Gilberto Freire, he was partially responsible for the idea that Brazil was a racial democracy. And when he heard that hundreds, if not thousands, of Black youth in Rio de Janeiro were coming together for what they called the Bailes Black, the Black dances where they played Black soul music, he was not happy with it. It's like, what is this imported pride of being Black? We're all just Brazilians. Why are you guys trying to dance to this American music? You're going to separate Brazilians. And it was like Brazilian society was already hostile to Black people. If you look at the history, how Brazil has traditionally treated Black people, like, what are you talking about? We're all just one group. You treat Black people, you treat white Brazilians one way, you treat Black Brazilians another way. So Black Brazilians, a lot of them they were frustrated with just being able to sing happy samba songs. I talked about this in several videos, actually, where I says that Black Brazilian women, if they wanted to be singers, the music industry in Brazil will automatically put them in the samba category, even if they wanted to sing another style of music. I talked about the importance of Whitney Houston, because can Brazil ever have a singer that ever reaches that much success? Of course, it probably wouldn't be possible because, Portuguese is not really a global language. Part of the reasons American singers sell so many records is because they appeal to a worldwide audience. So, but I'm just asking a question. Can a Black woman in Brazil ever be as popular in Brazil as Whitney Houston was in the United States? And up until now, I would say no. They always want to push Black Brazilians into singing samba. So this is what Tony Tornado was talking about in his interview. When he started making soul music, he started questioning, like, would you love Jesus Christ if he was Black? And it's like, oh, why don't you go back to singing samba? Everybody sings samba, right? The fifth point, again, is the influence of American soul music in Brazil. And the point is, as I said, in the late 60s, early 70s, and mid 70s, Black Brazilians were discovering Black American soul music. There's a scene in the Cidade de Deus, the City of God film, where they recreated one of these Black dances that was going on in Rio. Black Brazilians were starting to feel this pride in being Black, and a lot of them discovered this, through the introduction of soul music. And Tony Tornado was instrumental in the songs that he made. He didn't record samba; he recorded his own version of like Brazilian type of soul music. So even though he never became a big star, people remember him. The Brazilian James Brown. Some people will call him that. I met Tony Tornado in 2008 when I was in Sao Paulo. And I'll never forget because it was at the Troféu Raça Negra Awards. It's kind of like a Essence Awards, or better yet, NAACP type of image awards that they have in Sao Paulo for prominent Black people that contributed to the struggle in Brazil. And when I met Tony Tornado, I had no idea this guy was so tall. I'm 6'4.5". Tony Tornado, I think he's 6'5". Because this guy was looking me dead in my eye. It was amazing. I'm standing in front of Tony Tornado, So then after that, I tried to get all the records that I could, and I started finding videos of Tony Tornado. Then I found out about his story, and I want to talk a little bit more about that now. So first, I want to overdub the interview that he did on a podcast. Like I said, maybe it's not even on a podcast. I can't say. I just discovered the interview, so I want to overdub it. It says, actor singer Tony Tornado, would you still love Jesus if he was a man of color? Now, this is what the single looks like. Se Jesus fosse homem de cor, Deus negro, which means if Jesus was a man of color, Black God. So let me overdub what Tony Tornado had to say in this interview. One time I was on stage singing a song called Deus Negro. My faith doesn't modify or change, but I cannot remain silent. My question needs an answer. Can someone give it to me? That's when the ish hit the fan. Would you have the same love for him if Jesus were a man of color? Jesus, a man of color? Are you crazy? Blah, blah, blah. Then the church got in it. Then everybody got in on this. The black guy is a communist. A colonel once said, why? A black communist? I've never seen it. What is that? Wow, what's up with that? Why don't you sing samba, man? Sing samba like everyone else does, and so on. I only said those things because it was an opportunity for me to speak, because it was when I had the opportunity to speak, because I had a larger audience. Not that we demanded that the dances be black, but the type of music we presented was music that identified more with black people. I have no right to keep this to myself, understand? The thing that I knew, which was the thing of, not trying to start something, but of acceptance, of affirmation as a black person. None of this mulatto, none of this colored citizen, none of this mahon bon bon. So Tony Tornado said a lot in this. In that little brief interview, he asked, would you love Jesus? Brazil is known as the biggest Catholic country in the world. And I talked about this in a previous video and a previous post. Actress Roberta Rodrygo said, my father didn't believe in a blue-eyed God. And in this video, or better, in this article, and then later in the video, I just talked about how Brazil, when it's presented Jesus Christ in stage productions or films or television series, they always present Jesus Christ as a white man. They've used various actors throughout the years to present Jesus Christ in the same way that the United States has done, or any other country around the world that wants to present a Jesus Christ. They're always going to use a man who has more Eurocentric features, all right? So Tony Tornado asked this question way back in the 70s. Would you love Jesus Christ if he was a man of color? Now, a lot of people say, if you read what the Bible says, and it talks about how, Jesus had skin of, had hair of wool, and he had feet like bronze. So then the question would be, how could that be a European person with those type of attributes, right? So this is something that Tony Tornado also talked about in his song, and he got a lot of backlash at that time, which is what he's talking about here. Then we move on here to the point that I was just making. Sing samba like everybody else. That's what they're saying. You're black, man. Why you got to sing about this controversial stuff? Go back to singing samba just like everybody else does. All you black guys are supposed to sing samba. Be happy, right? Then this question of the affirmation of black people, the identity crisis that a lot of black Brazilians have. No, I'm not black. I'm a moreno. I'm a mestizo. I'm a pardo. I'm a mulatto. Anything but black. So Tony Tornado was saying back then, no, none of this mulatto, none of this pessoa de cor or person of color, none of this mahon bon bon. It's kind of like, a candy color or something like, chocolate. No, call yourself black. Let's say negro. You are black, identify with this. So this was Tony Tornado was back. He was all about way back in the early 70s, and he got into a lot of trouble for that, right? So at this point, I want to conclude the preview to this video. I'm going to continue on for the long term, the long format video for those of you who want to stick around and come over to the other side. But for now, I'm going to end this video and request that you all come back and check out the full video. So anyway, as I was saying, I want to continue with the Tony Tornado story. I said this in the first section of this video. Tony Tornado has a fascinating story. Let me just, like I said, he was born in 1930. This guy will be 94 years old on May 26, 1930. But there's so much more to this guy. I mean, he ran away from home when he was like 12, 13, 14 years old. He started shining shoes. But his story is just crazy. Let me just talk about a couple of the bullet points. As I said, this guy deserves his own movie, okay? First of all, Tony Tornado's father was named Ray Antonin. Ray Antonin was born in Georgetown, which was the capital of Guyana. But trip this, Tony's father was a survivor of the infamous Jonestown massacre led by cult leader Jim Jones in November of 1978 in Guyana that led to nearly 1,000 people dying after drinking a concoction laced with cyanide. It was this incident that led to the common phrase, "Don't drink the Kool-Aid." Tornado's father was born in Georgetown, the capital city of Guyana, also in South America. I was trying to figure out the timeline of this story. It appears to me that Tony's father was born in Guyana, ended up in Brazil, and then I would assume moved back to Guyana. If he was a survivor of the Jonestown massacre, this is the only way the story could make sense. According to Tony, some kind of way, his father, though he was born after the 1888 abolition of slavery in Brazil, worked in the remaining informal slave system on some plantations in Brazil's interior. His father was also used as a buck that impregnated various women on these plantations. His father had countless children. He married a Brazilian woman, Tony's mother, a relationship that led to the birth of Antonio Gomes, aka Tony Tornado, seen in this 1970s photo. And I'm saying, just looking at what Tony looks like is saying, wow, look at this guy. It was frowned upon for Black people to wear afros back in those days. So Tony Tornado was not only important for the music that he brought, it was the image that he brought. He's a Black man, dark-skinned Black man with an afro. Right. We're going to talk about why there's much more to that. I could do a whole video. Like I said, go back into blackbraziltoday.com and just punch in Tony Tornado. You'll see some incredible stories about Tony Tornado. The other thing is, in 1957, he went to the Middle East to take part of the Suez Canal War between Egypt and Israel. They sent Brazilian troops over there. He's lived in a number of countries such as North Korea, Angola, the former Czechoslovakia, Honduras, Denmark, and the United States before he returned to Brazil. Now, some of the years that he was outside of the country, he was in exile. I'm going to explain that in a minute. While he was in the U.S., he lived in Harlem in New York, where he actually worked as a pimp. Tony says he wasn't proud of that job, but it's the work that he could find at the time. As I said in the preview of this video, it was in New York that he met Chimaya. Chimaya was Brazil's, they call him like the pai do música soul brasileiro, like the father of Brazilian soul music. Chimaya was elected the greatest Brazilian singer in music, Brazilian popular music by Rolling Stone Brazil some years ago. Okay. While he was in New York, Tony Tornado got influenced by soul and the funk music of the time. And he was there smack dab in the middle of civil rights and Black power. So Tony Tornado was there. He brings all of this influence back to Brazil. And it was just unheard of, because I've been saying this for a while. When you look at the story, the history of interactions between Black Americans and Black Brazilians, the Brazilian government always wanted to make sure that Black Brazilians were not influenced by Black Americans, because they saw Black Americans as being a threat. They saw them as being militant. They saw them as being, they're going to stir up the pot. They're going to create racial hostility. There's other stories that I could tell you about other prominent Black Brazilians. Dom Filó, for example. Whenever the Brazilian government thought that a Black Brazilian was going to stir up the racial pot, they would arrest them. In some cases, they would torture them. Tony Tornado was arrested 9 times. Sometime in the 70s, he had to leave Brazil. It might have been in the late 60s, early 70s. He had to leave Brazil in exile, because they felt like he was just stirring up the pot. And the point is, Brazil was representing itself as a racial democracy all over the country when it was an absolute lie. And you had people like the Movimento Negro that were speaking out on. Now, the Movimento Negro actually came out in 1978, but you still had Black activists at the time that were trying to destroy the image of Brazil being a racial democracy. Abdias do Nascimento, the most well-known Black Brazilian civil rights leader, he was in exile in the early 70s because you couldn't speak out against racism in Brazil. It was like the government would arrest you. Okay. So this is the atmosphere that Tony Tornado was in the 1970s. Okay. So he escaped, lived in the United States for a while. He came back full of Black soul, Black Panthers, civil rights, Black pride. This is what Tony Tornado was about. He was an attraction at all of the Black dances that were going on in Rio. And you had these type of dances where young Black Brazilians were getting together, and they were just fans of the Black American soul music that was coming there. A lot of Brazilian artists started making their own versions of American soul music. Soul music put to Portuguese lyrics, So Tony Tornado, even though he wasn't a big star as as an artist musically, his ideas were a big influence in the 1970s. He was part of a movement that says we have to have pride in being Black. And as we just said, I don't want to, no more of this mulatto stuff, no more of this pessoa de cor, this person of color, Mahone Bonbon. Leave that to the side. We are Black people. This is why Tony Tornado was important in the 1970s. This is an early picture of Tony Tornado in the 1970s. Okay. I think this is his first album. It's either his first, I get the two mixed up, but both of his albums were self-titled. You'll see that a lot in Brazilian music. People just name the albums. They'll be just self-titled. Tim Maia has a whole list of albums that's called Tim Maia. And you have to look for the year to know to distinguish one album from the other. A lot of people used to do that. Tony Tornado on stage with a trio group called a Trio Ternura, right? Um, this group had a great album out in the early 70s. And you could tell their album cover looks sort of like something you would have seen of the Jackson 5 in the early 70s, right? So this group act as the backing vocal group behind Tony Tornado on some of his performances. This is them from the early 70s. This is another story I want to talk about. This lady right here is Elis Regina. This was at a show, I think somewhere in Rio. And Elis Regina had a song called Black is Beautiful, actually in English. The main parts of the lyrics were in Portuguese, but the title of the song was actually called Black is Beautiful. Tony Tornado was there. Tony Tornado comes on stage and puts his black fist in the air, in a black power salute, right? As soon as he comes off of the stage, Brazil's military police arrest him, put handcuffs on him and take him into the police station. They put him in jail. They could not have a black guy inciting black power, inciting the idea that black people should be proud of themselves. They should affirm themselves as being black people. Tony Tornado was arrested 9 times. They saw him as a threat. They saw other black Brazilians who were doing something similar as a threat, as bringing in this idea of black people should be proud in Brazil, because they felt like with so many black Brazilians, they could create a revolution here. That's why there's another story I have to talk about one day in the 1920s and 30s when black Americans started to migrate to Brazil, and they were actually blocked by the Brazilian government. That's a whole nother story. I have to talk about that next time. That's the story behind this one here. Yeah, Tony Tornado was married to a blonde actress, Arlete Salles. She actually talked about the difficulty being married to a black man in the early 70s. In a Brazil that's supposed to be a racial democracy, there's been a lot of black men who have spoken about the problems they have for being married to white women. If Brazil was a racial democracy, why was there a problem with black men being married to white women? Okay. This was a more recent picture of Tony Tornado. He's still performing, believe it or not, in his 90s. Tornado remembering being arrested after his performance with Elis Regina, the picture that I just showed you. Okay. They saw Tony Tornado as a threat. What if he brings black militancy in Brazil? We could have a problem on our hands. We have to get rid of this guy. He's a communist. This black guy is a threat. This is a picture of Tony Tornado. Obviously, emotional moment. People said, they gave him a birthday party for his 93rd birthday on May 26, 2023. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Tony Tornado. I can't, tell you everything about his life in just one video and keep it short. Okay. But even though he never became a superstar in terms of a singer, but there are some artists that have come out, their status was not necessarily based on how many albums they're sold, but sometimes it's the albums that they sold, but rather their influence on the people. You have a lot of underground hip hop artists who never sell 4 or 5 million albums, but the people who they got, who are fans, they changed their lives in some type of way. So even today, where black Brazilians can be harassed for wearing an afro, what they call cabelo grande or cabelo crespo, kinky curly hair. There was a story I did a couple of years ago where a kid got snatched off the street by military police because he was walking around with an afro. Okay. So I ask again, is Brazil really less racist than the United States? When you pull the curtain back, it's not necessarily the truth. When Tony Tornado came back to Brazil from the United States, he became more of an actor. Tony Tornado has performed in a lot of television series and novellas. So I think people who are familiar with him since the 80s and the 90s, they're going to know him more as an actor rather than as a musician. But in the early 70s, people who were alive then can tell you what the influence of Tony Tornado was. He was their own type of James Brown. So just wanted to introduce my audience to him. Man is 93. As I said in one video, I can't cover everything that's important about Tony Tornado. Maybe I'll return and do maybe a part 2 on this video. But for now, that's what I wanted to talk about. What if would you love Jesus if he was a man of color? That's still an intriguing question today, right? Anyway, what did you think of today's video? drop a comment in the comment section. Like this video, share this video, consider subscribing to the channel. Click on the notification bell so you'll be alerted when I put up a new video. And with that said, I'm going to end this video here and ask that you all come back. Check out the next video that I post.